Oh, yes! Oh! Oh, no. There's still no way I reviewed this game poorly. I mean, look at this. Yes. I'm sure by now that if you're interested in newly released open-world ARPG Biomutant, you've seen a lot of the game reviews. For the most part, the reception to the game has been pretty mixed. From the first reviews that were dropped from the standard early access game reviewers, we were told that the game was a heaping pile of dog shit. Before playing the game, I noticed the reviews and was in disbelief. I mean, we all saw that cinematic and gameplay trailers and we saw how cool they looked. I mean, the combat alone in the gameplay trailer was badass enough to warrant playing the game. Besides, that was real in-game footage. There's no way it could flop looking like this. I went into the game with the mindset that I will enjoy this game. Then I'm going to review it and it's going to be positive as fuck. In the beginning of the game, that attitude felt like it was being met halfway. Biomutant gave me a firm handshake in the beginning with an almost flawless set of character creation scenes. I'd picked the mercenary with the intention, of course, of dual-wielding ninja katanas. I went on to customize my marsupial's appearance. I decided that a back-alley street thug panda would be perfect for me. I accepted my character's specs and his brilliant appearance and jumped right into the game. As the game opened, I was met with another absolutely beautiful cutscene, with my character being pursued by some oversized ape mutant. From here, we were thrown into the world of Biomutant, and here is where our critical review begins. So, let's channel our ki, focus on our Wung Fu, and dive right in. As is standard in any open-world video game, it's probably important that we explore what the world is like. Good news, the world is vast, and the world is beautiful. The size of the playable map spans quite a ways and ends up being twice as big as Ghost of Tsushima, and about 25% larger than Red Dead Redemption 2. There's plenty of map for us to want to explore. An aspect of the open world that is important to consider in these types of games is, does the world match up with the video game's lore? In this specific case, I believe it does. The backstory of the game is that there's been some sort of planetary tragedy stemming from humans and their mass toxic treatment of the world. In the present point of Biomutant, you are some marsupial who was assumingly affected by some sorts of mutations to the point where I guess you have enough cognitive ability to interact with others, build tribes, and even engage in political conflict. As we enter the world, you'll find what remains of the humans and their time here. You see this in the form of old, worn, small neighborhoods or houses, small buildings, or in the form of factories and warehouses, where all the tech's been offline for a while and you have the ability to reconfigure some of the power boxes and other tools. The entire world also seems to have been taken over by nature, despite the main premise of the game being that you have to deal with this dying world. Most of the map is green and filled with lush, overgrown grass. The old buildings and human remains are typically wrapped in vines and overgrowth. But how does it look, P? In my personal opinion, I love this art style and the color palette they chose. The mostly lush green environment can be awe-inspiring. The gamers among us who would enjoy utilizing the camera mechanic will really enjoy finding new areas of the map to get the perfect, breathtaking picture. The world also boasts a day and night cycle, as well as dynamic weather. I mostly enjoyed the rainstorms mid-game, as I personally felt like the visuals from the downpour as well as the sound design for the rain was pretty fucking top-notch. I'm also going to throw Biomutant's crafting system into the open world discussion here, as I believe it's part of the whole reason to actually explore the world in the first place. The crafting system requires you to go around and loot, and in this game you can loot to your heart's content, and immediately pause the game wherever you'd like to, and just play with the crafting screen as much as you want. Reason number 2 as to why it's in the open world section is because it gives you full control of how your squirrel guy looks in the world. Nothing is more immersive to me in an open world than having full control of how your dude looks when running through the landscapes. You can really enjoy the system and its rewards because it allows you to be as silly or as serious as you want to be. Found a goofy looking headdress and want to deck it out so its armor value is viable? You could totally do that. Want to exclusively optimize gear that makes you look like a badass samurai? You could do that too. One of the coolest parts of the game is sitting in the crafting menu and deciding whether or not you should make that katana's handle from a piece of legendary tribal bamboo or a fucking banana. The game doesn't take itself too serious, and the crafting menu screen is ground zero for full control of how you want to appear in the game. Lastly, on the open world, we do need to acknowledge that points of interest that should fill the world are actually pretty scarce. I didn't necessarily find it more or less filled than most Assassin's Creed games, to be honest. But when you do find someone or something to engage with, the characters feel so empty that you almost wish you hadn't encountered them in the first place. The reason for this is strange because, honestly, it's one of the aspects of the game that I think is a total shit show, but at the same time, I find quite endearing. Of course, what I'm talking about is the narrator. The narrator is a part of Biomutant that many reviewers have been hypercritical of, and fair play. In one aspect in particular, the narration deserves lots of criticism. This part, as previously mentioned, is obvious when encountering NPCs in the world. The dialogue when speaking has three facets. The characters themselves making cutesy animal noises and grunts, while underneath the subtitles text for translation. But then, if that wasn't enough, the narrator also speaks over these two things for more of a translation. During dialogue, I found myself not even interested in hearing what they had to say, simply because they were flooding me from three sides, and it was very difficult to focus on one.
Says it's time to set the outpost free. Inflict as little damage as possible as you make your way through to the rival cap.
Well, then just turn off the narrator, P. Oh, 200 IQ play, doofus. And yeah, that would be a good idea, except for one thing. In all other aspects of narration aside from the dialogue, I actually really appreciated the narrator. Biomutant is a little different in the multifaceted way they choose to utilize this guy. On one hand, he acts as a typical narrator would, just sort of commenting on the goings-on of the game with his wonderfully pleasant English accent. In this way, I really enjoyed the contributions to the game. Lastly, he was utilized in a really interesting way that I found quite enjoyable. In Biomutant, you'll notice that there are 0 characters with any voice acting. Aside from the random animal grunts we hear in conversations with NPCs, there's no other dialogue in the game aside from the narrator. But we have a main character to connect with that doesn't do anything to interact with the player aside from a few dynamic gestures. So, how does Biomutant solve this? By using the same narrator as the internal dialogue for your squirrel-panda hybrid main character. You see this most when randomly running through the world and not interacting with points of interest for a while.
Never know until you try. Keep going.
When you just run around, you'll hear the narrator say things like, "Today is a great day for an adventure," or "A great story means nothing if there's no one around to hear it." It's these type of comments that made me think, who the hell is this guy talking to? Why would a narrator who's commenting on a story tell us the story needs people to hear it? Am I not right fucking here, hearing it? This led me to believe that in some instances, it was actually my character's inner dialogue, his thoughts manifested into the narration of the game. Later, we'll talk about the underlying messages the game attempts to send, and we'll revisit that inner dialogue dynamic and see what they were trying to do. We're going to be starting to visit some of the mechanics in the game that I actually did not enjoy whatsoever. Combat in an ARPG is super duper important. It's an action role-playing game, so if the action, i.e. combat, is not good, you're slowly going to start seeing your fan base die. The unfortunate thing about this is Biomutant utilizes combat mechanics from great games such as Devil May Cry and the Batman Arkham trilogy, but still manages to somehow mess it up. If you look at the trailer we saw with the jumping around and the aerial combat, the kung fu, mutant powers, and sweet gunplay, you would have thought there's no way they messed this up. This looks friggin' sweet. And you're right, it does look sweet. The problem with this mainly stems from the devs apparently not understanding combat is more than just visual. Beginning with the audio as the main problem for combat, it's just really tough to listen to if I'm being honest. Like, there's no oomph. I don't hear a difference between when I land a blow with a giant cleaver and when I land several blows in a row with the aforementioned dual ninja katanas.
Slash and dash.
All the weapons fire and sound the exact same. The only difference is how often they shoot, meaning my fully automatic is going to make the same exact sound as a single-shot rifle, just obviously at a higher rate. Unfortunately, none of the combat involves any bass whatsoever, which would probably have gone a long way in diversifying the feel of each of the weapons. For example, with a controller in my hand, I should feel the block I made on a melee attack, which led to me parrying. Instead, there's almost no audio cues or controller felt cues in order for me to feel like I just blocked a weighty blow. The unfortunate aspect of combat in Biomutant boils down to just being a lot of flash with no substance. It's a lot like the dynamic in one of my favorite movies, White Men Can't Jump. Very similarly to how Billy tells his basketball running mate Sydney he'd rather look good than win.
I'd rather look ugly
Shut
and win.
the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
A lot of Biomutant's combat looks good if you're not playing it, but it certainly isn't a win. Speaking of not a win, we've got the puzzles in Biomutant, and god damn it, after 25 hours, if I wasn't saying, why the hell are these puzzles even in the game? I don't understand. Like, honestly, they're so over the top easy, they don't accomplish anything for the game. They're not satisfying to complete because they're no-brainers, and they don't increase playtime by making you think, because honestly, they could be completed by an actual squirrel, and not the evolved mutated one you're playing as. This is definitely one of the bigger frustrations I have, because as much as I'm against adding filler in the games for the sake of filler, I'm also against having added things in the game that means nothing. It's almost an insult to the player base to have them. Obviously, it would have been better if the puzzles were more challenging, but I'm honestly at the point where if they truly believed it was too difficult to put harder puzzles in the game, I would have rather just not seen them at all. Now moving along to the story. Now, in some open worlds, the story is the driving factor. This can be seen in games like Witcher 3 or the first Mass Effect trilogy. They drive the player's experience in the world and can oftentimes be the sole engine that moves the player's motives to immerse themselves and do the things that get you from point A to B. But there are also open worlds that are great even though the story is lackluster. I'm not sure if this is a contentious take or not, but I've never found Fallout 3, New Vegas, or Fallout 4 to have particularly good stories. But in spite of that, they remain great games. For those types, it's mainly moment-to-moment gameplay that matches perfectly with the world's lore. It really immerses you into those experiences. So what kind of game is Biomutant? Biomutant is the game that attempts an immersive world through stunning visuals and lore, but flops harder than the kid jumping off the diving board for the first time. The story is kind of half-hearted and leaves lots of holes to be filled by the player's exploration of lore clues and dialogue. While the lore clues are cool for the first few hours, as mentioned before, the dialogue in this game is the real killer. Plain and simple, I found myself no longer caring about finding out exactly what happened to the humans and where to go from this point simply because I couldn't stand encountering the NPCs. Instead, I found myself scrounging through old human neighborhoods looking for clues, only to find that the lore from that experience just isn't enough to stand on both feet. I'm not saying that if I could stand the dialogue from my NPC encounters, it would have guaranteed a better story. But what I will admit is that missing on what seems to be half of the information needed to understand definitely didn't help. It's possible that if they had an option to turn off the narrator exclusively in dialogue, I may want to revisit it just to make sure. But I can't promise I'd be willing to even give it a try. There is some good through the story, though. As shallow as it may seem, the messages being sent through the entire game are very good, and things folks can generally get on board with. The most obvious of these messages is how we're polluting the world in a way that is slowly killing it. That mankind does in fact need to find a safer way to deal with our toxins and dumping our shit any and everywhere. One of the other messages that I gathered from the game that some might have missed is the positive self-talk or positive inner dialogue. My entire first playthrough was done in a way where I leaned my character's reputation towards the light, which is a more, heroic approach, I guess. I mention that to say, had I chosen a more dark or evil approach, it's possible my take on this may be different, but here's what I got. As I mentioned before, it seemed to me that the narrator also operated something akin to an inner dialogue. I found that when he did speak in this manner, it was always so positive. In his excited, enthusiastic English voice, he would always give me positive feedback like, "You can do this," or yelling, "Take that," when I landed a strike on an enemy.
Never know until you try. Keep going.
Sometimes when I was running around, the sun would begin to rise on the horizon. He would say things like, the excitement of a new day, or what an excellent day for an adventure. He was always so positive, and what I believe the message to be here was the impact of positive self-talk. As someone who struggles from deep-seated anxiety and, by association, some minor depression stuff, here and there, the impact on this, wasn't lost from me. And, maybe that's kind of lame, but it's what I extracted from the good points of the story. And honestly, I really look at it, in a really positive light. In conclusion to this review, Biomutant has spread itself pretty thin. It shows you the functionality of a fantastic open world game, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. I want this review to remain somewhat spoiler-free, so I can't go into all the ways I found disappointment through the later part of my gameplay. But in the first few hours, the game looks you dead in the eye and is all like, hey you, check this out, and proceeds to show you something really cool. From character customization to the beauty of the open world, I did truly feel fully immersed in my first few hours and found myself really giving a shit about what was happening. The problem came when, after introducing these cool concepts and mechanics, it felt like they were never added onto. Part of the excitement after the introduction of the combat system, for example, was how I envisioned how far I could push it. Come to find out, for each style of combat, there are only like an extra 1 or 2 button combinations of moves to unlock, essentially meaning that within an hour or two, you could have fully experienced everything on a dual-wielded style combat, for example. This lackluster approach can be found sprinkled into almost every function of the game. I was really disappointed because from those first few hours, I felt like this had the potential to be an absolute banger. To me, Biomutant is a lot like the soup that you warm up in the microwave. You put it in for the allotted amount of time, and it always seems like the outside of the bowl is excruciatingly hot, but you just can't seem to get the content anything other than lukewarm no matter how long you leave it in the microwave for. I do think it's very important to mention something though. It's not always fair for each new game in a genre to carry the weight of the apex of said genre. It's not fair to Biomutant to expect it to be on par with Witcher 3, for example. What is fair when reviewing pieces of work like this, though, is to consider how they present themselves during the state of gaming at the time they release. Here's what I mean. Gaming as a whole is in a really awkward spot, especially for single-player games. Things like microtransactions and forced multiplayer features and remakes of remakes are things that really plagued the industry during the release of Biomutant. This is important to remember as we do have to give credit where credit is due. THQ Nordic did try something different, new, and exciting. And it's also important on how we look at efforts like this. This is not just a failed attempt that warrants anyone thinking they deserve a refund. Yes, I'm disappointed in the game, but not because it sucks, more because it's so close to doing something really cool. Another way that it's important to view these games when reviewing is to consider who the game may work for. As an adult and a veteran of the genre, this game does not bring me what I need. But who's to say that a child looking to break into the open world RPG scene wouldn't enjoy this? I'm not excusing the half-baked functions of the game, but if anyone could still appreciate it, it would be the youngins looking to break into the scene. For example, I'm a dad, and my kid plays games all the time, like how I do. They're obviously not playing the same games that I'm playing, but I found myself playing God of War 4 when I was approached and asked when they could play games on this level. Obviously, the violence and the content of some of these games are going to make me tell them no for much longer than I'd like to, but what if there was a game that could help them break into some more tough-to-play genres to help them get their feet wet? Enter Biomutant. I would absolutely give my child this game and know that there's no edgy content to worry about. They can enjoy a beautiful world and give it all the exploration it may need. I know there are some gamers that don't like to hear this type of stuff because it sounds like I'm giving excuses, but I'm absolutely not. I would not recommend this game for a veteran gamer. I'm simply saying it may be perfect for the gamer youth to break into the hobby that we all love so much. Let's not forget where we came from as gamers and the games that molded our childhood. For me, it was Super Mario World and Mega Man that introduced me into this addiction I conveniently refer to as a hobby. And as games have evolved and become more complex and difficult to navigate, it may be fair to think that Biomutant may be what helps some young kids get their foot in the door. Thank you guys so much for watching the review, man. I really appreciate a receptive audience because these reviews do take a little bit of time to get out to you guys. So if you did enjoy it, please make sure to smash the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel for lots of reviews and throwback docuseries just like this one. Also, if you agree with anything that I said, leave a comment down in the comment section. If you disagree, do the same thing. I want to hear from everybody and let's get a decent discourse going on in the comments, okay? Thanks again for watching, guys. I appreciate every last one of you, and I'll see you in the next one, man. Peace.